A single tablespoon of one of America's best-selling mayonnaise brands contains roughly 90 milligrams of sodium and is built on an oil that makes up over 65% of the jar by weight, and that oil is almost never olive or avocado, despite the picture on the front. The number 2 condiment in American refrigerators, by some retail tracking estimates, lists modified food starch and high-fructose corn syrup before it lists a single egg yolk on certain variants. The Food and Drug Administration sent a warning letter in 2015 to a company selling a product literally called Just Mayo, telling them their eggless spread could not legally use the word mayo at all under the federal standard of identity, and the brand kept the name anyway after a public fight, and one popular jar contains a synthetic preservative called calcium disodium ide, a chelating agent originally developed for industrial cleaning applications and heavy metal poisoning treatment. Now sitting in the same jar people scoop onto their kids' turkey sandwiches every single afternoon. You probably have a jar in your fridge door right now. You probably bought it without ever flipping it around. Mayonnaise is one of those condiments people assume is basically the same everywhere. It's eggs, oil, vinegar, a little salt, maybe lemon juice, maybe mustard. That's the recipe your grandmother used. That's the recipe in every cookbook printed before 1970. But the jar you bought last week at the grocery store is a different animal entirely, engineered for shelf stability that runs months past purchase, viscosity that survives a pressurized squeeze bottle, and a price point that requires the cheapest possible base oil. Americans buy roughly $2 billion of mayonnaise every year. It goes on sandwiches, into tuna salad, into chicken salad, into deviled eggs, into coleslaw, into potato salad at every cookout from May to September, into ranch dressing made from scratch, into the secret sauce on the burger you ordered last weekend. It is not a once-in-a-while indulgence. For a huge portion of the population, mayonnaise is a daily ingredient, scooped by the tablespoon, spread by the knife, squeezed by the bottle, and almost nobody is reading the label. The branding is the trick. The front of the jar says real, it says original, it says made with cage-free eggs, it says crafted, it says since 1905. Words like real and original are not regulated for nutritional meaning, they are marketing. The back of the jar tells a different story. And on a lot of these jars, the second ingredient is not what you would guess if you had to bet $100 on it before flipping the bottle around. Real mayonnaise, by the federal standard of identity, has to be made with edible vegetable oil, eggs or egg yolks, and an acidifying ingredient like vinegar or lemon juice. That standard does not say which oil. That standard does not address sweeteners, gums, preservatives, or natural flavors. The legal definition is a doorway, and a lot of brands have driven a truck through it. I'm going to walk you through 8 mayonnaise brands sitting on the shelf of every American grocery store right now, brands you have almost certainly bought, and tell you exactly what's on the back of those jars, in the order the manufacturer chose to list those ingredients. Then, I'm going to give you 3 brands that, when you flip them around, look like the recipe your grandmother actually used. Before we get into the 8, do me one small favor. If you've ever spread mayonnaise on a sandwich and assumed you knew what was in it, hit the like button. Tell me in the comments which brand is in your fridge right now, because by the end of this video you might want to throw it out, and I want to know which one we're talking about. Subscribe if you haven't, because we do this kind of label investigation every week on this channel. Number 1 on the avoid list is Hellmann's Real Mayonnaise, sold as Best Foods west of the Rockies. This is the king of American mayonnaise by market share, and the front of the jar leans hard on the word real and on the heritage dating back to a New York deli counter in 1905. The reformulation history matters here. The original 1905 recipe was a small batch emulsion of egg yolks, oil, vinegar, and seasoning. The current jar lists soybean oil as the primary ingredient. by weight, which is typical for the category, with water, whole eggs and egg yolks, vinegar, salt, sugar, lemon juice concentrate, calcium disodium, EEDTA, listed as added to protect quality and natural flavors. Soybean oil is an industrial seed oil, refined through a process that typically involves hexane extraction, deodorization, and bleaching. The calcium disodium EDTA is the chelating agent I mentioned in the opener. It is approved as a food additive, but its presence is a flag that the product is engineered for very long shelf stability. The natural flavors line is the legal black box. Under federal labeling rules, that phrase can cover dozens of compounds without further disclosure. None of this matches the picture of Grandma's recipe on the front. None of it. Number 2 is Kraft Real Mayo. Kraft is a household name, and the jar carries that authority. But the standard Kraft Real Mayo lists soybean oil, water, whole eggs and yolks, vinegar, then sugar, then salt, then lemon juice concentrate, then natural flavor, then calcium disodium EDTA, then dried garlic, paprika, sugar appearing that high on the ingredient list, listed in 5th or 6th position, is a quiet thing most people miss when they grab the jar. Mayonnaise is not supposed to be a sweet condiment. The traditional recipe has no added sugar at all. Some Kraft variants in the broader portfolio also list modified food starch, which is added as a thickener and stabilizer in lower fat versions, and which keeps the product from breaking the way a real emulsion would. The product still meets the federal standard of identity for mayonnaise, but the experience of eating it is engineered, not cooked. The flavor profile your taste buds register has been adjusted with sweeteners. The texture has been adjusted with gums or starches in certain variants, and the shelf life has been adjusted with chelators. It is a manufactured object, not a sauce. Number 3 is Miracle Whip, which is technically not even mayonnaise. This is important. Miracle Whip is legally classified as a salad dressing, not a mayonnaise, because its oil content is too low to meet the federal standard of identity for mayo. People treat it as mayo. People put it on sandwiches as if it were mayo. The label on the front does not say mayonnaise, and that is the only honest thing about it. The ingredient list typically opens with water, then soybean oil, then high fructose corn syrup, then vinegar, then modified cornstarch, then eggs, then salt, then natural flavors, then mustard flour, then potassium sorbate as a preservative, then paprika and spice and dried garlic, then a coloring agent often listed as paprika oleoracin. High fructose corn syrup as the third ingredient is the headline. This is a sweetened, starch-thickened, soybean oil-based emulsion with synthetic preservatives and added color. If you have been spreading this on sandwiches thinking it is a slightly tangier mayo, the math on what you are actually eating is dramatically different from what you assumed. Number 4 is Duke's Mayonnaise, the Southern favorite with a fierce regional following. I want to be fair here. Duke's deserves a partial credit nod that the other industrial brands do not. Duke's contains no added sugar, which is genuinely uncommon in this category and a real point in its favor. The ingredient list runs soybean oil, whole eggs and egg yolks, water, vinegar, salt, then a small amount of paprika, natural flavors, and calcium disodium EDTA. So no corn syrup, no modified food starch, no extra sweeteners. That is a cleaner label than Hellmann's or Kraft on the sweetener front. But the base oil is still soybean oil, which is the same industrially refined seed oil sitting in every conventional jar on this list. And the calcium disodium EDTA is still in there. Duke's has built a reputation on being more traditional, and on the sugar question that reputation is earned. On the oil question, it is the same story as everyone else. Number 5 is Blue Plate Mayonnaise, another Southern brand with deep roots in Louisiana and a loyal following in the Gulf states. Blue Plate's standard jar lists soybean oil, egg yolks, distilled vinegar, water, salt, sugar, lemon juice, and calcium disodium eta. Sugar is back on the list here, lower down than in Kraft but present. Egg yolks rather than whole eggs is a small nod to the traditional emulsion technique since classical mayonnaise is made from yolks alone, and that is a fair detail. But the same fundamental architecture applies. The base oil is soybean oil. The shelf stability additive is in the jar. The marketing leans heavily on regional authenticity, on the idea that this is the mayo your great-aunt in Baton Rouge used. The recipe your great-aunt actually used, the one she made by hand for Sunday lunch, did not contain hexane-extracted soybean oil or a chelating agent borrowed from the industrial cleaning sector. The brand's heritage and its current ingredient list are two different stories. Number 6 is Trader Joe's mayonnaise, and this one requires careful unpacking because Trader Joe's sells multiple mayo SKUs and the difference between them matters. The standard Trader Joe's real mayonnaise has historically listed soybean oil as the primary ingredient, along with whole eggs, egg yolks, distilled vinegar, water, salt, sugar, lemon juice, and natural flavors. So the conventional jar is squarely in the category of every other industrial mayo on this list. Trader Joe's also sells an organic mayonnaise. The organic line uses organic ingredients, which avoids genetically modified soy and certain pesticide exposures, and that is meaningful. But the organic version on certain runs has still listed organic expeller-pressed soybean oil as the base. Organic soybean oil is still soybean oil. Expeller-pressed is a better extraction method than hexane, which is real progress, but the underlying fat profile is the same high omega-6 seed oil. The front of the organic jar communicates a very specific health-positive message. The back of the organic jar, when read carefully, communicates a more nuanced story. The claim and the listing do not say the same thing to a careful reader. Number 7 is Sir Kensington's, and I want to give this brand a genuinely fair treatment because they have done some things better than the rest of the field. Sir Kensington's positions itself as a premium, modern condiment company. Their classic Sir Kensington's mayonnaise lists sunflower oil as the primary ingredient instead of soybean oil. Sunflower oil is still a refined seed oil and still high in omega-6 fatty acids, but for shoppers specifically trying to avoid soy, that is a meaningful swap. They also use certified humane free-range egg yolks, which is a real animal welfare upgrade over the conventional category. Their standard jar contains no calcium disodium eta, no modified food starch, and uses lemon juice and white vinegar as the acid component. The downside on the classic jar is that the base oil is still an industrially processed seed oil, sunflower, or in some cases canola, depending on the variant. So Sir Kensington's Classic is a meaningful step up in transparency and in some ingredient choices. But if your concern is specifically the seed oil category, the Classic line does not solve that. They do make an avocado oil version, which we will come back to in the pure section. Number 8 is Just Mayo, the brand that became the center of one of the strangest food labeling fights in recent memory. Just Mayo was launched by the company then called Hampton Creek, now called Eat Just, and it was an eggless mayonnaise built on a pea protein base. In 2015, the FDA sent the company a warning letter stating that, because the product contained no eggs, it could not legally be called mayonnaise under the federal standard of identity, and that some of its health and cholesterol claims were not substantiated. There was a public fight. The company pushed back hard. The warning was eventually withdrawn after labeling adjustments, and the product stayed on the shelf with the Just Mayo name. That history matters because it shows how aggressive food brands can be in pushing label boundaries and how a company that wins a regulatory battle is not necessarily a company whose product matches what you assume from the front of the package. The current product is built on canola oil, water, lemon juice, white vinegar, modified food starch, sugar, salt, pea protein, spices, and a few other functional ingredients. It is plant-based, which is its own legitimate selling point for shoppers who want that. But if you bought it, assuming it was a clean label health product, the modified food starch and sugar and canola oil base may not be what you expected. Quick reset before we keep going. If this label-by-label breakdown is useful, smash that like button so the algorithm pushes this to other people about to grab the wrong jar this weekend. We have 3 pure brands coming up, but first, the worst offender on this list deserves a longer look. The standout, the brand that combines the most flags in a single jar, is Miracle Whip. It is worth dwelling here. High fructose corn syrup as the 3rd ingredient by weight on a product that millions of people treat as mayonnaise. Modified cornstarch as a thickener, doing the structural job that egg yolks do in real mayo. Soybean oil as the base fat. Potassium sorbate as a preservative. Paprika oleoresin as a coloring agent to deliver the visual cue of richness. Natural flavors covering whatever proprietary flavor system the formulation requires. The product was invented in 1933 during the Depression as a cheaper alternative to mayonnaise, and the recipe has been engineered ever since for cost, shelf life, and a specific tangy sweet flavor that is genuinely distinctive but is not, by any honest reading, mayo. The fact that it sits next to the mayonnaise on the shelf, in a similarly shaped jar, with similar branding language, on the front, is the heart of the consumer confusion. If you have a jar of Miracle Whip and you have been thinking of it as mayonnaise, the actual product in your fridge is closer in formulation to a salad dressing built on corn syrup and starch than to anything your grandmother would have recognized. Now I want to take a beat and be honest about something. The original Hellmann's recipe, the one from the deli counter in Manhattan in 1905, was a genuine emulsion of egg yolks, oil, vinegar, and seasoning, and it was a real product made by a real person. The challenge of taking that recipe and producing it at the scale of millions of jars per week, shipping it across a continent in trucks that sit in summer heat, and keeping it stable on a grocery store shelf for 6 months is a genuine engineering problem. Mayonnaise is an unstable emulsion by nature. It wants to break, it wants to separate, it wants to spoil. The additives in industrial mayo were not invented by villains. They were invented by food scientists solving real problems. The criticism here is not that these companies are evil. The criticism is that the marketing has not kept pace with the formulation, and the front of the jar still tells the 1905 story, while the back of the jar tells the 2026 story. Those two stories have drifted apart, and the consumer holding the jar in the grocery aisle is the one stuck in the gap. I want to tell you about something that happened to me a few weeks ago. I was at a friend's house for a barbecue. They had made a chicken salad, and I asked what brand of mayo they used because the texture was unusual. It was glossier, almost wetter, and it had a faint yellow tint that the chicken salad I make at home does not have. They handed me the jar. I flipped it over. Sugar was the 5th ingredient. They had no idea. They are a smart, careful person who reads labels on cereal and yogurt. They had just never thought to flip a mayo jar around because mayo, in their head, was eggs and oil and vinegar. The story on the front had been the only story they had ever encountered. That is the entire problem in one moment. The wobble of a homemade aioli is different from the firm peak of an industrial mayo. The sheen of an emulsion stabilized with IDTA and gums catches the kitchen light differently than one made with just yolks and oil that morning. Once you have seen both side by side, you cannot unsee it. I went home that night and lined up 3 jars on my own counter under the same overhead bulb. The industrial jar held a peak like soft serve, perfectly stiff, almost too rigid for a sauce. The avocado oil jar slumped slightly, the way real mayonnaise should, with a soft fold rather than a sharp edge. The homemade batch I had whipped up that morning was wetter still, looser, almost runny by comparison, and had that pale gold color of fresh egg yolks rather than the bright, bleached white of the supermarket jar. 3 different products, 3 different textures, 1 word on every front label. Now the 3 pure brands. These are the jars where, when you flip them over, the back of the label tells the same story as the front. The first is Primal Kitchen Mayo, made with avocado oil. The ingredient list is short and clean. Avocado oil, organic cage-free eggs, organic egg yolks, organic vinegar, water, sea salt, organic rosemary extract. That is the entire jar. Avocado oil instead of soybean or canola or sunflower oil is the headline upgrade because avocado oil has a fundamentally different fatty acid profile, weighted toward monounsaturated fats, rather than the omega-6 polyunsaturated fats that dominate industrial seed oils. The rosemary extract serves as a natural antioxidant, doing the shelf life job that ETA does in conventional mayo, but with a botanical compound that has been used in food preservation for centuries. There is no added sugar. There is no modified food starch. There are no natural flavors covering for a proprietary blend. There is no chelating agent. The texture is slightly different from industrial mayo, a touch softer, a little less rigidly stable on a knife. And that is exactly what you would expect from a product built on actual emulsion chemistry rather than engineered stability. It costs more. That cost reflects the actual ingredient bill. The second is Chosen Foods Avocado Oil Mayo. Same general philosophy as Primal Kitchen, slightly different formulation. Their classic jar lists avocado oil, organic cage-free eggs and yolks, organic vinegar, water, salt, organic rosemary extract, organic mustard flour. Again, the list is short. Again, the base oil is avocado, not soybean. Again, no added sugar, no ETA, no modified food starch, no proprietary natural flavor blend. Chosen Foods has built a brand specifically around avocado oil as a category, and their mayo is one of their flagship products. The taste profile is mild and clean, closer to what you get if you make mayo from scratch at home. If you put a tablespoon of Chosen Foods next to a tablespoon of conventional industrial mayo and look at them in the same light, the visual difference in sheen and the wobble when you tilt the spoon is genuinely noticeable. One of them is a manufactured object, the other is a sauce. The third is Sir Kensington's Avocado Oil Mayonnaise, which is a different SKU from their classic and deserves to be evaluated on its own. The ingredient list runs avocado oil, water, organic cage-free egg yolks, distilled, vinegar, salt, lemon juice, and a few minor functional ingredients. No soybean oil, no ETA, no modified food starch, no added sugar. This is the jar where Sir Kensington's transparency commitments and their ingredient choices line up cleanly. If you like the brand, the avocado variant is the one that earns the premium pricing and matches the front of jar story to the back of jar list. Worth distinguishing this from their classic line because they are not the same product even though they share a brand name and a similar bottle. The avocado jar typically sits a shelf above the classic in price, and that price gap reflects a real ingredient swap, not just a different label color. A note worth pausing on. None of these 3 pure brands are perfect. They all use refrigeration-required language after opening. They all have shorter shelf lives than the industrial competitors, and they all cost roughly 2 to 3 times as much per ounce. That is the trade-off. Real food, made with real ingredients, costs real money and behaves like real food. It does not last 6 months in your door. It does not survive a hot car ride home from a summer cookout the same way a collator-stabilized industrial jar does. If you make the switch, you have to use the jar within a reasonable window after opening, and you have to keep it cold. Those are not flaws. Those are signs you are eating an actual emulsion of egg yolks and oil rather than a manufactured shelf-stable product engineered for the supply chain. Now the framework for how to read any Mayo jar going forward. There are 4 things to check. First, the second ingredient. Mayonnaise should list water or eggs or yolks or an oil right after the primary fat. If the second ingredient is something you would not put in a homemade batch, that is a flag. Second, identify the oil source. If the label says soybean oil, canola oil, or just vegetable oil, you are in industrial seed oil territory. If it says avocado oil, olive oil, or expeller-pressed organic versions of better fats, you are in a different category. Read carefully, because some jars list a primary good oil and then add a cheap oil further down the ingredient list as a cost cut. Third, scan for sweeteners under all their names: sugar, high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, cane juice, evaporated cane juice. Any of these in a mayonnaise is a departure from the traditional recipe. Real mayonnaise contains no sweetener at all. Fourth, look for the additive flags: calcium disodium, EDA, modified food starch, natural flavors as an unspecified line item, potassium sorbate, sodium benzoate. Any of these signals a product engineered for shelf stability and texture rather than made the traditional way. A clean Mayo label is short. If the ingredient list runs more than 7 or 8 items, ask why. One more piece of context worth knowing. Food safety recalls in the condiment category happen regularly, and mayonnaise specifically has been involved in product withdrawals in recent years tied to undeclared allergens, processing concerns, or ingredient supply chain issues. The FDA's recall database is public and searchable, and any responsible label reader can spend 20 minutes looking up the recall history of any major brand they buy regularly. The Just Mayo regulatory history I mentioned earlier is one example of how aggressively brands push labeling boundaries. The takeaway is not that the food supply is dangerous. The takeaway is that the assumption of safety based on brand recognition alone is not enough. The label is the primary source of truth, not the front of the jar, not the commercial, not the heritage story. There is a 5th check worth adding for the careful reader. Look at the order of ingredients and ask whether any oil appears more than once under different names. Some products list a primary oil and then add a second oil further down the list, sometimes labeled as a flavoring carrier or as part of a spice blend. The total oil profile of the jar is then a blend, and the blend is what your body actually receives. Read the whole list, not just the top 3 lines. The bottom of the list is where the small print ingredients live, and the small print is often where the most interesting story is hiding. A jar that opens with avocado oil and closes with 3 lines of stabilizers, gums, and natural flavors is not the same product as a jar that opens with avocado oil and closes with rosemary extract and salt. One last note before the closing. Mayonnaise is one of the easiest sauces in the world to make from scratch. 1 egg yolk, a teaspoon of mustard, a tablespoon of lemon juice or vinegar, a pinch of salt, and roughly 3/4 of a cup of a good oil whisked in slowly. That is the entire recipe. It takes 5 minutes with a whisk, less than 2 minutes with an immersion blender. Knowing that the entire industrial mayonnaise category is a 5-minute homemade sauce engineered for shelf life and shipping changes the way you read the label on the jar at the store. Here is your one action for today. Go to your fridge, open the door, find the mayo jar, pick it up, flip it around. Read the second ingredient out loud. Read the 5th ingredient out loud. If the second ingredient is soybean oil and the fifth ingredient is sugar, and somewhere down the list you find calcium disodium EDA, you now know exactly what is in the jar you have been spreading on sandwiches. You do not have to throw it out tonight. You do not have to make any dramatic change this minute. But the next time you stand in the grocery store with an empty jar in your hand, you will be a different shopper than you were yesterday. You will know what real means on the front of a jar versus what it means on the back. You will know which oil is in the bottle. You will know whether sugar is hiding in your sandwich spread. You will know what a chelating agent is doing in a condiment. That is what consumer awareness actually looks like. Not panic, not fear, not a $100 haul of replacement products this weekend. Just one jar, in your hand, in your kitchen. Read all the way through for the first time. That is the whole exercise. The jar you reach for next month, after 1 minute of label reading tonight, will be different from the jar you reached for last month. That is how change actually happens in a kitchen. One jar at a time, one label at a time, one careful flip at a time. If you found this useful, hit subscribe so the next investigation lands in your feed when it drops. Drop a comment with the brand currently sitting in your fridge door, because I read everyone and I want to know what people are actually buying out there. We are doing ketchup next week, and after that salad dressings, and after that the entire condiment shelf, brand by brand, label by label. Until then, flip the jar. Read the second ingredient. That is the whole job. Take care of yourself and take care of what you put on your sandwich.